you need to be in the Word regularly. And it says, according to the American Bible Society, 52% of Americans wish they used the Bible more. But for most of the last decade, about half of Americans said they use the Bible 3 or more times per year. Come on, beloved. 3 or more times per year is how many times people are opening the Bible. That was 39% of people who say that they're in the Bible 3 or more times per year. We need to be reading the Bible regularly. And listen, beloved, you know that I've always told you, find a translation that makes sense to you. If you're a King James only person, that's fine. I'm not here to tell you you're wrong. Then read the King James. If you're not, then find a translation that is meaningful to you. Even if you're choosing a paraphrase that reads more like a story as part of your daily reading. Okay, it's one thing, you know, if I'm doing daily reading, I might choose the Message or something like that that's more of a story, written in a story way. But when I'm preparing a sermon, I use a completely different Bible because I have a different goal when I'm preparing a sermon than I do when I'm reading my daily reading. If reading is not something that goes well for you, there are a number of ways. I've told you I listen to a podcast. There are a number of podcasts. I listen to one that 5 days a week, and I make it through the Bible in a year. Okay? And the amount of time that it takes him, or them, there's two of them, they're cousins, and the amount of time it takes those two men to read the daily Bible reading is just about the amount of time it takes me to get to work. Some mornings they're done by the time I get to the bypass, depending on what the reading is. Some mornings, usually they're finished right about the time I hit the industrial park in Mossheim. And then a couple of mornings I'll have to sit in the parking lot for a minute or two while they finish the reading. And my team knows that if I'm just sitting in my car when I just got to work, what I'm doing. I'm finishing my daily Bible reading. So whatever it is that will get you into the Bible, I encourage you to get into the Bible. And I told you years ago, it's not necessarily a goal for you to read the Bible through every year. That's a wonderful thing. If you do that, that's amazing. But, you know, maybe your goal is to read the Bible through every 5 years. And that's fine. It doesn't matter. We're not in a race. We're not in a competition. What we want to do is spend time in the Word of God every single day. And so I hope you'll find a way. And if you need help with that, come see me, and I will be more than happy to help you find something that will work for you or share with you the podcast that I use, and even the one I used to use. But anyway, I hope you'll get into the Word. All right, let's get into the Word. In the Garden of Gethsemane, there was no way to mistake Jesus for someone else. Not only did Judas identify him with a kiss, but Jesus also boldly stated, "I am he." He was not afraid of Judas or the mob. This was his hour. Jesus is still in control of every situation, even the ones we find overwhelming. Now, I want you to understand all of creation has been pointing forward to this event. Okay, all of it. Okay, we see, if you read the Old Testament with New Testament eyes, okay, everything in the Old Testament was pointing forward to this. As early as Genesis 3:15, this event was prophesied. Okay, it was prophesied by God himself that this event was going to come. God told the serpent that one was coming to destroy the works of sin and redeem humanity. Jesus being arrested was part of the serpent's attempt to strike the Messiah's heel. A plot to kill Jesus as an adult began to gain momentum after he healed a man on the Sabbath. Throughout his ministry, religious leaders attempted to capture and kill him. Even his own family thought he was crazy and tried to restrain him. His time, however, had not yet come. Think about it from Jesus' perspective. We saw that throughout his earthly ministry, It wasn't just the disciples that didn't get it. His own mother and his brothers didn't get it as well. They didn't understand who he was. They didn't understand what he had come to earth to do. And then after ascending the Mount of Olives, Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane for prayer. This was a normal part of his Jerusalem routine. But this night had a different feel. Now, Judas really didn't have any idea. We'll talk about this more in a moment. Judas really didn't have any idea where Jesus was going to go after they left the upper room. But because this was normal for Jesus, because this was where one would expect to find Jesus, then that's where Judas took them. Jesus, when they came, asked those in the mob who they were seeking. When they told him, he firmly confessed, "I am he." And the power of his presence and the authority of his manner sent the crowd falling backward. If he wanted to resist, God could have called angelic armies to his defense. But he was willing and ready to drink the cup of suffering that would provide salvation. Lou, would you read verses 1 through 3, please? So in Jerusalem, if you're familiar with Jerusalem, you've seen the Dome of the Rock, and it, of course, is up on Mount Moriah. And then as you're facing east, there is a gate that has been bricked over. That was the beautiful gate that you see referenced in Scripture. And it was bricked over because Christians kept causing trouble there. Especially messianic expectations, and so they bricked that over so that there wouldn't be all of this trouble. And now the only gate that's left on that side of the wall is the gate that we refer to as St. Stephen's Gate, and that's because outside of that gate is where Stephen was stoned, where the first Christian martyr was stoned. And as you come out of that gate, there's this little valley. And as you're looking across this valley, there's the Church of All Nations up on a hill. And just off to the left of that church is an olive garden or an olive tree garden with a low wall. The wall isn't much higher than this modesty panel is to me, not as it is to you. It's a very low wall. It's really about that tall. There is an olive tree in that garden very close to the Church of All Nations that is 3,000 years old. So we know that that tree was in that garden when Jesus was there that night. And as is the custom of the Catholic Church, wherever there is a place that they feel is theologically important, they build something right on top of it. Okay? And so there's this huge stone in that garden that tradition says is the stone that Jesus was praying at. You've seen it in the pictures and the paintings that we have. And so this Catholic Church, half of it is the stone is inside the church, and the other half of the stone is outside the church. And of course, we don't know whether that's the stone, that the actual stone. It really doesn't matter, beloved, okay? It doesn't matter. We're not into that kind of thing. Remember what Paul said, that it's not about special days and special places. It's about what's going on inside our heart, okay? And isn't that what Amos said to us over the course of chapter 5, is that, guys, I don't know why you're bothering to go to Bethel. I don't know why you're bothering to go to Gilgal. I don't know why you're bothering to go to Beersheba. You're trying to get somebody else's blessing. You're trying to get somebody else's experience. And God has never been after that, okay? He wants to have a personal relationship with us. Although, while we were there, we went inside that church. It was part of the tour that we were on. And there was a service going on at that point, and the monks were chanting in Latin, and I hadn't been to seminary yet, and Latin is not one of my languages, okay? I never had to study Latin, although I have read some books by scholars that clearly assumed you did know Latin, okay? But anyway, we're in there, they're making their chants in Latin, and they were swinging the incense censer, and so I could smell the incense, and I just went over to that rock and started pouring my heart out to God. Just started talking to God, and I got completely lost in God. I mean, completely lost. And Angie had to come over and shake me, physically shake me and say, we're leaving now. And I didn't want to, okay? I didn't want to, because I just got completely lost in God there. Just was talking to him, and he was talking to me. It was amazing. But anyway, just wanted you to understand a little bit about that region and where they were. Now, remember who Judas was. Judas wasn't an outsider. Remember that Judas got his feet washed that night. Okay? He left after that. He even partook in part of the Passover meal. He didn't partake in all of it, but he partook in part of it. And despite these advantages, Judas conspired with the priest against Jesus. Now, get this in your mind, beloved. This was not something Judas sitting at the table that night went, you know what? I think I'll go talk to the priest. I think I'll set him up. This is something that Judas had going on since at least they had come into town on Palm Sunday. Okay? And so Judas had been conspiring against Jesus. Now, you can go with whatever theory you want to go with. Some say that Judas was just trying to force Jesus' hand because he had this messianic expectation, okay, that if all of this happened, that Jesus would move, that he would call down those 10,000 angels, that he would defeat the Romans, throw them out of Jerusalem, and set up the messianic kingdom right then, right there. And that Judas was just trying to force Jesus' hands. Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. Where have we heard that? Didn't Satan try to do the same thing? In the temptations, he tried to force Jesus' hand. If you are the Messiah, if you're really him, if you are really him, throw yourself off the temple. Turn these bread or these stones into bread. See, beloved, we can't force God. You know? Do we not try to do that? We get ourselves into a mess. We rush forward with something. And we assume that God is just going to show up and take care of it. Okay? You know, they used to have a sign at the middle school, and it stuck with me, and it was, I cannot get you out of a problem that you behaved yourself into. Okay? And so many times we behave ourselves into a problem, and God says, this is your mess. You made this mess, and you're going to have to suffer the consequences. Yes, he's there. He's not abandoning us. But there are going to be consequences. Hopefully your consequences aren't as severe as Judas's. But there will be consequences for our defiance of God. Now, why Gethsemane? Well, number one, it was a place that was, as I said, out of town. Okay? It's outside. You know, a lot of us, we think that Jerusalem, it was at that time, was huge. Okay? It wasn't. The one thing that strikes you when you go to the Holy Land today, especially once you get inside the old walls, is how small that area was. I mean, literally, you can walk from one side, from the wall on one side to the wall on the other side in less than a half hour. maybe quicker if there aren't a lot of people there, or if you don't run into a singing car. Angie and I were in the Armenian Quarter, and I kid you not, there was a car that was singing. There were speakers underneath. There was nobody in the car, okay? And this car is playing some kind of music and singing something, and yeah, I ain't never seen anything like that before. And I stood there and studied that thing for a while, and I never did figure out why that car was singing. But it's really small. And at this time of year during Passover, it would have been cram-packed with people. And some of those people, listen to me, beloved, they're still the Good Friday crowd. Okay? Or no, they're still the Palm Sunday crowd. I'll get it in a moment. They're still the Palm Sunday crowd. Good Friday is still about 12 hours away. And so they may have risen to Jesus' defense. And so the authorities want Jesus in a place where there's nobody around so that they can do what they want to do. Now, the word company. We really don't know how many were in this party. Some say that it could have been as many as 600. Some say it could have been around 200. I don't know how many were in the company. It really doesn't matter. They were better armed than the apostles. Every one of them was armed. We know the apostles had 2 swords. Peter had one of them. We also know he wasn't really that good with a sword. Okay? He's aiming for the guy's neck, and he hits his ear. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But the truth here is that believers can expect enemies of Jesus to oppose them just as they did Jesus. Sharon, would you read verses 4 and 5, please? Knowing everything that was about to happen. And yet he responded to the mob with calmness and authority. Jesus woke the sleeping disciples. It was time to be alert. And he moved past the disciples and moved toward Judas and the approaching mob. Do you understand what Jesus was doing? He was putting himself between the mob and his men. He was sheltering them with his presence. He insisted they reveal their purpose, not for his knowledge, but to confront their conspiracy. Listen to me, beloved. He insisted that they confess their sin. He made them confess their sin. Now, they didn't repent, but he made them confess their sin. Judas perverted this customary greeting and transformed it into a means of treason. John doesn't tell us that Judas kissed Jesus, but we know that he did from what Matthew tells us. And in that culture, it was the normal sign of greeting. I know men don't do that in our world today, but that was a customary greeting, and we still see that in some cultures today. And notice that they offered him no title of respect. It would almost be like, my coworker got subpoenaed this week to produce video evidence. He oversees our cameras, our security cameras, and there was an event that the law needs footage from our security cameras. And so he received a subpoena. And it would almost be like the deputy coming in, instead of saying, I'm looking for Mr. Chuck Broyles, to just say, I'm looking for Chuck. Okay? They offered no respect. They said, we are searching for Jesus of Nazareth. Sweetheart, you read verses 6 through 8, please. And so once again, we see that Jesus has placed himself between the mob and his men, and now he's specifically, listen, remember what your mom and dad told you when you were young? What happens when the law shows up? Everybody goes to jail, right? Everybody goes to jail when the law shows up, and they're going to sort it out downtown. They're not going to try to figure it out in your house. They're not going to try to figure it out down on the lake. They're not going to try to figure it out wherever it is. Everybody gets those special bracelets. Everybody goes to town, okay? And they will sort it out there. And if I said, you know, my wife was with me in something, I said, listen, she didn't have anything to do with this. Let her go. You think they're going to do it? No, they're not. Because I'm in no position to testify to her innocence at that point. But Jesus doesn't ask, he commands. He says, if you have come looking for me, these men are innocent, let them go. And they did. Okay? And when Jesus, they asked him, they said, we're searching for Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus says, I am he. And again, some scholars don't believe that this is one of the I am statements. Other scholars do believe, and I am one of the, I'm not a scholar, and I don't play one on TV, but I do believe that this is one of the I am statements. That Jesus specifically uses that phrase. How do I know that? How did they respond? They drew back and fell to the ground. Why? Because Jesus had just committed blasphemy in their eyes. He had associated himself with Almighty God, with Yahweh. He had indicated to them, he had used the name of God in their presence. Jesus stepped forward while the crowd fell backward, highlighting his authority and their weakness, and his words overwhelmed them. The officials and troops came for him with drawn weapons, but he was the one truly in charge. And then again, you may not catch this, but the name demonstrates the historicity of Jesus. Okay, Angie and Lou and Nick know this, and Sharon. If I'm looking around in Belize and you say, who are you looking for? And I say, Jesus, what have I told you? Not a thing, okay? That is a very common name down there. You still don't know who I'm looking for. But if I said, Jesus, the son of, or Jesus of this community, or the Jesus that lives on this street, now you know who I'm looking for. And so this indicates the historicity of Jesus. They're not just looking for a guy by the name of Yehoshua, very common name back in that day. Okay? They are looking specifically for the Yehoshua that comes from Nazareth. Okay? And so, again, that's one of those small clues that the Bible is true. And although the crowd didn't recognize his deity, they could not ignore his power. Jesus knew what was about to happen and submitted to the Father's plan. He placed himself into their custody. Do you understand? They didn't place him in their custody. He placed himself in their custody. He remained in charge throughout the whole thing, even knowing everything that was about to happen. And he was more concerned with the safety of his disciples than his own well-being. Isn't there something about that Caiaphas unknowingly testified about and prophesied about? He said it's better that one man die than everyone in the nation. Jesus was more concerned about fulfilling that prophecy than he was about his well-being. In verse 9, confronted by an armed host, he took the initiative to preserve their safety. He was willing to lay down his life for them. We need to understand the Christian life is not without danger. Following Jesus does not mean we will never suffer for our faith, but it does mean we can face whatever challenges come with the confidence that we are not alone. He is with us, and he is in control of everything. Diane, you read 10 and 11, please.
And Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew
I love Peter. I do, because he does some of the same boneheaded stuff that I would do, okay? I mean, here I am, grossly outnumbered. I have men in front of me with long-range weapons. They have spears. Some of them may have even had bows. And I have a short sword, okay? It's not very long. It's a short sword that I got to be up close and personal to use this thing. And so I'm looking at this group of well-trained professional soldiers. I'm a fisherman with a sword. And so what does he decide to do? He decides to jump into the fray with a short sword, aiming to cut off a man's neck. Okay? Now, why would he go for the head? Because that's what he saw in all the video games he played, right? No, I'm kidding. Okay? It's because usually this part of your body is not armored. And there's two really, really, really important arteries on either side of your neck. And if I can hit one of those, you're out of the battle. You may be dead, but you're at least out of the battle. You're not going to be able to continue fighting if I get your carotid or your jugular. And so Peter is swinging for this guy's neck, and he misses. We don't know whether the guy dodged. I mean, I don't know. You're swinging a sword at me. I'm probably going to try to do something to get you to miss. Okay? But I want you to understand. Okay, let's put it this way. All of us are out at a fellowship that we've gone to. And somehow or another, somebody has made a complaint. And the law shows up. And I pull out my pistol. What have I just done? I've endangered not only myself, but all of you as well. Because what's in the mind of the law? If he's got a pistol, who else has got one? And they're now ready to attack this entire group of men, all 11 of them. And Jesus immediately says, put it away. Am I not to drink the cup the Father has given to me? Peter and the other disciples still did not understand Jesus' purpose. He didn't come to start a war. He came to drink the cup of his Father, to suffer and die for the world's sin. He understood the physical suffering was only part of what was to come. Theologically, the cup included not only bodily pain, but also spiritual horror. On the cross, he who had never sinned took on the sins of every human to provide salvation. See, the reason that we think the crucifixion wasn't that bad, I mean, it's only 3 hours, right? I mean, yeah, it hurt. It would hurt to have somebody drive a nail through this hole between the two bones in your arm. But you know what? You've all seen it. Any of y'all ever hurt yourself pretty bad? And at the moment of the hurt, the one thing that you remember didn't really hurt that bad. I cut the end off of this finger. Didn't really hurt that bad. Until after it was all over. Okay? Until after I was somewhere where I felt safe. I was able to walk almost a half a mile with the end of my finger cut off, bleeding profusely. Okay? It didn't hurt that bad. But we think that Jesus being on the cross didn't hurt that bad. It's not the physical suffering, beloved. It is the fact that he that knew no sin was hanging and writhing on that cross for every sin I have ever committed. And every sin you have ever committed. And that was the pure agony of being on the cross. Jesus' response to Peter went further. Those who live by the sword are likely to die by the sword, he said in Matthew. Jesus refused to allow Peter or anyone else to interfere with his messianic mission. If we use worldly ways to escape suffering, we risk missing out on being Jesus' witnesses. Only by yielding to the Father's will and accepting his plans can we demonstrate his redeeming love to a lost world. Questions or comments this morning? Thank you for joining us. If you're joining us online, we'll be back in a minute or two for our morning worship.